The Liberal Party elects its first female leader, while the Albanese government's new look frontbench is sworn in. I'm Isobel Roe, live from the lands of the Ngunnawal people. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. Sussan Ley has been elected the new leader of the Liberal Party, defeating Angus Taylor 29 votes to 25. Ted O'Brien was successful in his bid for deputy leader after being challenged by fellow Queenslander Phil Thompson, who decided to run on a whim. Will the new leadership team be able to turn the party's fortunes around after a disastrous election loss? We'll speak to Liberal MP Melissa Price. Ministers have been sworn in and the obligatory class photo has been taken at Government House, but the party is still dealing with the fallout of two senior cabinet ministers, Ed Husic and Mark Dreyfus, being dumped. Will the factional fights have further ramifications? We'll ask former Labor advisor Ryan Liddell later in the program. The United States and China have agreed to a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs, with Donald Trump praising the deal as a total reset. The US says it will drop its 145% tariff on China to 30%, while China has agreed to lower its rate on US goods to 10%. How will this impact the US economy and Australia's? Australian National University economics professor Warwick McKibbin joins us later in the program. Newly elected Liberal Party leader Sussan Ley has vowed to do things differently as she takes the party forward following its bruising election defeat. Standing beside Ted O'Brien, who's been elected as deputy leader, she's told media she's honoured to lead the Liberals with humility. National Affairs correspondent Jane Norman spoke to Liberal MP and Party Whip Melissa Price earlier about the result.
Melissa Price, welcome.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for having me here this morning.
It's a pleasure. As the acting chief opposition whip, you played a central role in this morning's vote. Take us through what happened, and we obviously know the result, but from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's, it's a fairly straightforward process. Yeah. You do a roll call. You make sure that, we said there was going to be 54 people were entitled to be in the room, and we confirmed that through the roll call. Yeah. 54 ballot papers have been prepared. We prepared multiple sets of ballot papers. We actually prepared about 8. My team prepared...
Just in case?
Yeah, just in case. You've got to be prepared for these things. You ask for the candidates who wants to be the leader of the Liberal Party. And at that stage, both Sussan and Angus stood up. No one else stood up, thank goodness, because, that would have been even more work for us, potentially more than 8 rounds. And... and then we hand out, we tell everyone we've got 54 ballot papers, we hand them out, make sure there's none left, and people vote, and then we go around with a little box, and people place their vote in there, and then we leave the room and invite both of the candidates to have someone scrutineer on their behalf. So there's a few of us in a separate room doing that. We count the votes, and we come back and say, so we counted the votes, and Sussan Ley is our new leader, and invite her to come and take her chair, which is up the front, yeah. And then we rinse and repeat for the deputy role. And obviously with Ted O'Brien being chosen as our deputy leader. So yeah, I'm pleased from my perspective that it was pretty straightforward, but we were prepared for, at the end of the day there's 54 people, so there could have been an even vote. Could have been an even vote. So that's why we were prepared for multiple rounds of balloting.
So Sussan Ley prevails. Are you willing to say who you backed in this race?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I don't think it would be a surprise. I was interested that, a lot of there's a so-called list going around of people saying, they're going to vote for Angus or vote for Sussan, and I was in the undecided, which I thought was remarkable. Very close to Sussan. She's been a very good colleague to me, great mentor to me. So, yeah, for me, there was no competition. And it's not because she's a woman, let me just make that very clear. We need good men and women in our party, and it wasn't just that she was a female, the reason why I voted for her. But, yeah, I'm quite happy to say that now, that, yeah, I should have been on that Sussan list from day one. So it was remarkable that I wasn't, but, yeah, happy to say that I support Sussan.
And how do you feel about the result?
Well, I'm very happy with the result because now we also, with Ted in that role, I think both Ted and Sussan, I consider them to be right in the middle. They're in the sensible centre, and I think we have an opportunity now to build our great party and also make sure we understand what the people of Australia who are they now? We cannot look to the past and say, well, that's what we used to do. We have to look to the future. And I think with Ted, I jokingly say to him, it's great that he and I both have a corporate background. You know, we're not these political beings that have been around the party forever. So we bring something different to what a lot of other, we are a broad church at the end of the day. So I like the fact that he has a corporate background, because I think he'll bring a bit more disciplined, a few more whiteboards going up, and just a little bit more of that sort of corporate vigour, I think, will help us. Whereas Sussan, as a female, she will approach things completely differently to what a male would do, but she's got fabulous experience. Of course, I love the fact that she's a regional woman as well, like myself. So I think that the two of them together is a very good combination.
And the fact that Sussan Ley is a woman is not the whole story, but it is part of the story, right? Like, it's a significant thing. Today, the Liberal Party has elected its first female leader. Talk me through the significance of that.
Well, as I was sitting in that room today, and it's not my original thought, I've got to credit Alex Hawke, he said how fantastic the next time maybe not the first time we go back to the Liberal Party room, but there will be a photo of a woman. I mean, that is historic. The first female leader, federal leader of the Federal Liberal Party. It is exciting and it's exhilarating to think what we will be able to achieve. But it's what we can achieve together. Yes, it's not that she's just a woman, but she's got great experience. But it is significant, and we shouldn't just paper over that. It is significant that there will be a photo on that wall of a female. And that'll be the first time in our party's history.
Now, you said one of the advantages of a Sussan Ley-Ted O'Brien combo was that the party has just opted for moderates. You've avoided a lurch, perhaps, to the right, which was at risk today. Talk me through the thinking there. Like, were you worried about the party going down a more populist line? We heard through the campaign, likeness to Donald Trump and his populist policies.
Well, I mean, lots of commentary around the Liberal Party was too right-wing during the campaign, or not right-wing enough. I mean, the reality is, when you look at the seats that we lost, and some of them we lost, spectacularly, we weren't leaking votes to the right. We were, the Labor Party was picking up the vote. So votes don't lie. So we need to be really clear-eyed about that and have a look at that in great detail. I mean, I'm not talking about a review, that'll happen in due course. But you just have to look at that. I mean, in my own seat, Pauline Hanson's party, their vote increased a little, but we don't have 5 lower house Pauline Hanson candidates about to line up and join us. So I just think that's nonsense. So we actually need to be really open-minded about, well, what actually happened. And that's why I think, I'm sure there'll be many issues where Ted O'Brien and Angus Taylor would be aligned on. The same for Sussan. So, we are a broad church. This sort of populist cultural wars, I think Australia said, we don't like you doing that. So, we need, it's not me saying that. We actually have to look at what the electorate wants and expects from us. It's nothing to do with our values and principles. At the end of the day, we have to determine what are our policies, and we had some very good policies, but for whatever reason, and there's lots of reasons, and we'll uncover that in due course, people didn't like our message, or they didn't like the messenger, and we need to understand that. And certainly in my electorate of Durack, I've had a two-party preferred swing to me of 5 or 6%, so I'm back up to about a 10% margin. And in Western Australia, more broadly, people voted for the incumbent. So, and I'm trying to understand from colleagues, every state is slightly different. You can't just say, oh, here's a whole bunch of reasons why. Every state is quite different. So, we need to take the time to understand that. But at the end of the day, we are a fabulous party, and I want our supporters and our potential supporters to know that we will get our act together. We will get our act together, and we will be a fabulous opposition who is going to be ready to govern come the next election.
So you mentioned policies. I want to ask you about 2 particular policies that have come up in recent days. Do you want the Liberal Party and the coalition more broadly to stick with its commitment to net zero emissions by 2050?
Yeah. I thought you'd asked me that, Jane, and I don't think that's something that I should be talking about today. It is too soon. Look, I'm an ex-environment minister. I think that the Liberal Party, our values and principles are about protecting the environment. We don't often talk about that as the Liberal Party. Let me tell you.
Should you more? Should you talk about it more?
100% we should. 100%. It's one of our values and principles that caring for our environment. Being a Liberal Party environment minister, and I'm sure Sussan Ley would have had the same experience. You know, for your own party, you're too left. And for the left, you're too right. So it's certainly a poison chalice. So that is something that we need to have a serious conversation about. But you know what? This was not a climate change election. It was, and 2022, it was not a climate change election. And in fact, I said at the time, the climate wars are over, but the energy war has begun, and that is what we should be focusing on.
Nuclear then. Do you want the party to ditch nuclear energy as part of its platform?
No, I think it's too soon to jump to that, so I'm not going to say yes or no, but we do have to have a serious conversation with Australians, and I think Australians have figured this out. I don't believe, and I've been laughed at by some, I don't think nuclear was actually really an issue. It certainly wasn't an issue in my electorate. People weren't even talking about it because they know that from an energy security and from a cost perspective, we're in trouble. We're in trouble and we need to solve it. And more wind turbines and solar panels is just not going to cut it. So we actually need to have an honest conversation, and it would be really good if both major parties could come together and say, can we at least just investigate nuclear? That would be the best case scenario. Let's just investigate it. What would it look like? Because we're not going to get there with renewables.
Would you like to see the party then reframe its nuclear policy? So not ditch it, but actually have another go at selling it to the Australian people?
Well, I think we definitely need to do that, but it's more about how we're going to reframe it, and we're the party that says it's all of the above. All of the above is necessary. You know, we have to be starting to look at, well, what's happening in the coal industry. Is coal still going to continue to be a part of our energy mix? The same with gas. As a West Australian, of course, we're holding our breath for that Karratha gas plant decision, and hopefully that will happen sooner rather than later. But it's all of the above. We need it all. And in fact, just starting to have conversations around net zero, that's not what Australia expects us to do. That they're not even thinking about that. They figured it out all by themselves. That politicians.
So you think the debate's happened? Australians have accepted net zero?
Yeah, I think so. I just don't think they're even talking about it. They're not, as I say, the climate wars are over. They're over. I mean, of course, the Greens would have you think differently, but I think the climate wars are over. People now are very focused on what does our energy future look like.
Melissa Price, we're running out of time. I wanted to ask you one final question. You're obviously very happy with today's results. Sussan Ley has emerged triumphant, but the vote was so close. The number's something like 27 to 25. How united is this team really when about half the party room opted for each candidate?
Yeah, so that's 29-25.
Sorry,
just for clarity's sake. Look, I'm only going to just judge it by the handful of colleagues that I spoke to after, and there would have been people that I guessed would have voted for Angus and some that voted for Sussan. I think people are like, okay, this is what we've got to do now. We are Team Liberal. We just cannot afford to have one faction, two factions, three, whatever. We just cannot afford to have that because Australia expects better from us. So I was really quite pleased with the reaction I was getting from people. Just, again, I'm still in the acting whip role just to try to understand how people were feeling. And people were satisfied. Like, okay, this is the way we are. We've got to move forward. And Angus is, was an incredible contender, and he has an important role to play going forward in the
as Shadow Treasurer.
Oh, that's not for me to even speculate on, Jane.
All right, we wait the front bench announcement. But Melissa Price, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
At the same time the Liberals were casting their votes, the Labor cabinet was at Government House being sworn in by Governor-General Sam Mostyn. It was all smiles from the new and refreshed cabinet, and there was even some time for some footy, albeit accidental. The first of many balls in the air the new ministers will have to juggle as they get up to speed on their portfolios.
I'll try that again. Get your brother to kick the ball down that way.
Are these your children?
Yes.
Come on in. Come in where you can see. Why don't you stand there? Come on in, come in so you can see properly. And your husband. Come in so you can see properly. There you go. There you go. you reckon you can hang there while we do this? Yeah? It's the best seat in the house that you have. I'm going to
The Honourable Annika Wells MP as Minister for Communications and Minister for Sport.
Sussan Ley has paid tribute to the Sensible Centre in her first press conference as opposition leader. In a secret ballot inside the party room, she won with 29 votes to 25, becoming the party's first female leader. Asked why she thought the Liberals lost, she said the opposition failed to meet people's expectations, but refused to be drawn on whether the coalition will keep their nuclear power policy or their commitment to net zero. She rejected the premise that her appointment to the Liberal leadership is an example of the glass cliff effect, which refers to women being appointed to leadership when an organisation finds itself in a difficult position.
It's an interesting question, the glass cliff, and I actually don't accept it in my appointment. But I do say that it does send a signal to the women of Australia that the Liberal Party has elected its first woman leader, but my agenda is about much more than that. Of course, it is about reconnecting with women and listening to where we went wrong. But when you develop a cohesive, consultative party room process, it includes a range of views, and I know that I can lead that effectively and well.
The ABC's senior digital political correspondent Brett Worthington has been looking at the gender split in the major parties this week, and he joins us now. Hi, Brett.
Hello as well.
Let's go first to Sussan Ley, the first woman to lead the Liberals. Does that glass cliff theory hold?
Well, it's certainly a historic moment for this party, and there's this incredible moment where the party has been so woeful at both bringing women into its ranks and getting women to vote for them that they woke up the day after that election repudiation and found themselves with women running all parts of this party in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and then even running the ballot there. The task now for Sussan Ley is to go and find where the community exists. Now, they exist in cities, particularly in urban areas which were once heartland parts for the Liberal Party. Whether or not this then meets the moment of is she the right leader? You've got her, Angus Taylor were both regional-based politicians that are now tasked with overseeing that. But Sussan Ley is saying, yes, I am a woman. That is a product of who we need to find. But he's also trying to say it is not just because I am a woman. Other parts of the party are saying there was no option but Sussan Ley. Now, 25 people thought a different option. If this party had have turned away the competent woman who's put in the hard yards to get to that position, there were grave concerns about what that would have said about this party.
She has been non-committal about gender quotas, but she says she wants more women in the party. Those two things haven't worked previously, but how is she going to do it going forward?
Yeah, so at the moment the coalition's sitting around about a third of its party room will be women. That is a far cry from what Labor has got. Now, you need to remember that Labor's efforts with quotas has been a 30-year project to go from 14% up to the current rate of 57%. Now, whether or not they have to have mandatory quotas, I think, is still an open contest that exists within the party. You look at maybe the UK Conservatives as a possible path there going forward. But there is this question about why is it that the Liberal Party, which once was able to attract the majority of female voters, why is it they're no longer representative of it? It's been a party that has very much lurched further to the right, has less focused on issues that directly affect people, and have been more caught up in culture wars, as we saw throughout the election campaign. So tacking back to the centre will be important.
Well, and on that, I mean, she won 29-25, as we've said. How does she have difficulty now steering that ship when there's such a large group of people in the party who wanted to go in a different direction?
Yeah, I think what Melissa Price was saying there, Tony Abbott won the leadership with one vote back when the coalition was in opposition. So there is a way in which the party can come together and have that task of reaching government. I guess the difficulty here is that the task before the coalition now is whopping. The size of the difference in those party rooms will be so stark when they sit within the chamber. Sussan Ley has both got to work on a way to bring together the party room, but then find the party to tack further back to the centre. Now, this is a party that there are large parts of it want to tack further to the right, and how she's able to do that will be a real test of the early phase of her leadership. And the fact that people are running around saying certain senators are leaving, which will mean the numbers will change, is a potential that, there are people keeping a close eye on the party room. And Sussan Ley says she'll be there in 3 years. I guess some parts of the party are thinking that could be otherwise.
Let's turn to Labor, the new ministry sworn in today. Anthony Albanese has been very vocal about the number of women that he has. But what are the numbers actually saying in his cabinet this time around?
Well, he can thank the factions for putting forward women to the executive of this government. So the two factions put forward the 30 names. Now, they are split down the middle, 50-50, in terms of 15 women were put forward, and you have a cabinet now and a broader front bench, unlike one we've seen previously. But you look at the numbers of the people that Anthony Albanese himself gets to appoint, the assistant ministers, there are 12 of those. Only 4 went to women. At the envoy level, 3 of 7. So Anthony Albanese has recruited, when he got to pick, he only gave roles to 36% of the time did he give it to women into those positions. And that is something that is closely being watched, especially where Anthony Albanese is a member of the left faction. The left faction is dominated by women, and there are open questions now within the Labor Party about, hang on, in all our efforts to be more reflective of the community, we have brought a lot more women in, we've brought in people with different backgrounds. Why is it then that the people who are missing out on opportunities are the women, are people who have a different background from the men who frankly look and sound like me within the Labor Party?
Great, thank you so much, Brett, really appreciate it. Well, it was all smiles as Liberal Party members left the party room today following the vote for the captain's hat. Liberal MP Aaron Violi telling the waiting media his colleagues, regardless of how they voted, now needed to get behind their new leader.
As a party, it's important that we now unify behind Sussan. We have a big job to do. It's not just on the leader, it's us as a party to unify, make sure that we support her, put the right policies in place, and that comes about from listening. So there are a lot of lessons from this result as a party we need to take, and we have to do it as a collective. We have to work together to understand where we went wrong, why we were rejected by the Australian people, be humble, listen, learn and move forward as a collective. It's the only way we can survive.
The appointment of Sussan Ley is the first step in a rebuild for the Liberal Party, and she wasted no time today vowing to put all policies under review. It seemed to reignite debate about whether Australia should be trying to reach net zero emissions by 2050, with some in the party now agreeing they should reconsider that part of their energy policy, even some moderates. I spoke earlier to Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg about what today's leadership decision means for the party. Andrew Bragg, thank you so much for joining us. As a moderate yourself, you must be happy with the result of Sussan Ley as your new leader.
Isobel, I'm not particularly interested in factional labels or labels that are used for internal purposes, but what I can say is that it is a good result that the Liberal Party has conducted a ballot, and I want to acknowledge the good work of Angus Taylor, and we now unite under Sussan Ley, who I think can take the Liberal Party back to the centre, which is where elections in Australia are won.
29 to 25 is very close though. Can the party really unite behind Sussan completely?
I think so, and what you saw in the last parliament was that people were prepared to unite completely behind Peter Dutton, and Peter was able to have a very clean run, and I think that is what I would expect going forward. The Liberal Party understands the moment that we are now living through, that the government have been re-elected, they're a bad government, they're a weak government, and we must expose their shortcomings but also offer a fundamentally different alternative on the policy front.
You must be familiar with the concept of a glass cliff, women who are often brought in to fix something. Has Sussan Ley been given an impossible task here?
I don't think the Liberal Party is broken. I think we are Australia's best bet in terms of economic policy and also on showing that we are a fair society. And I think if we are able to develop policies which allow Australians to be their best on the economy front, but also in a societal sense, then I think we're in a good place. And Sussan, I believe, is very well placed to provide that leadership.
Well, the electorate resoundingly rejected you at this very recent election. So what policies are you going to develop that will convince people another way next election?
The starting point is understanding what you're trying to achieve, and what we are trying to achieve here is a set of economic policies which allow Australians to be their very best, to compete on the global stage, but also to ensure that all Australians feel that they are respected, valued, included, and that's why I talk about fairness. I think fairness is a key plank of Australian liberalism, and it was something that Robert Menzies talked about a lot, and I think economic leadership as well as fairness are going to be two important planks going forward to win the trust of Australians.
Did you have enough economic leadership going into that election? Should Angus Taylor stay on as Shadow Treasurer?
I think it's clear that we were not able to develop enough policies in enough time to present Australians with an alternative that was going to make their lives better in terms of the small business person or the factory worker or the tradie or the typical family in the suburbs. We weren't able to harness that, and so we must have the right tax policies and labour law policies and energy policies, for example, to be able to win their trust, to improve their lives.
So should Ted O'Brien, for example, as the new deputy, get to be the Shadow Treasurer?
That's not a matter for me, Isobel. That's a matter for the leader and deputy leader to canvass. But what I will say is that the Liberal Party needs to show fidelity to liberalism. We should be liberal on the markets front, and we should be liberal on the economy, because ultimately it is the private economy, private investment, small business, large business, which is going to ensure that Australia is strong and prosperous, and we need to be drivers of that prosperity.
One of the issues that Sussan Ley's spoken about already this afternoon has been the issue of women. Does Sussan, being a woman, automatically win back women, or is there more to it than that?
I think you and I both know there's more to it than that, but I think it is important and a historic moment for the Liberal Party to have a female leader, and frankly it has taken too long for us to get to this point, and I look forward to being part of a team which is developing policies for all Australians, men, women, multicultural communities, vulnerable people, minority groups. We have to be able to speak to all parts of our society. And I think in the past, perhaps in the recent past, there's been a sense that we weren't able to speak to all different sectors and clusters of our society, and that some people felt that we weren't the party for them. But the great virtue of the Liberal Party and liberalism is that we are able to throw the blanket over all Australians, and that is what I believe Sussan will be able to do.
The National Party have indicated that they could start debating again whether or not they continue to back net zero. Sussan Ley has essentially put all policies like that under review, including net zero, when she was asked specifically. Is that the sort of message that you want to be sending?
I think it's eminently sensible that you look at all the policies, but the baseline is that we do want to reduce emissions. That needs to be done in a global compact, and of course we want to be mindful of the impact on power prices. So you've got to do this in a way which is going to be sensible, because you don't want to export industry and jobs. So I think that is an eminently sensible position to take from the leader, and that policy alongside others will be reviewed.
Is that really the sensible centre, though? I mean, that's the sort of call of Matt Canavan. Is that where you should be going as a party?
I've just said that we are committed to cutting emissions as part of a global agreement. So that is my position. That is the sensible position that we would have. But we also want to make sure that we can do that in a way which doesn't make people's lives harder. And so what that means is looking at the price impact of how you do these things. And as I say, you review policies after an election loss. It doesn't mean you're junking anything necessarily, but you review them because you want to make sure that you've got the right calibration.
So perhaps it's reviewing the time in which it took to get to net zero, or the way in which it's done, not necessarily whether or not you do it at all?
The Liberal Party signed Australia up to net zero. That was an important judgment for the former coalition government. Australia has to play an important role in reducing emissions, and we will propose to do that going forward. But we will also announce our own domestic policies as to how we will do that in due course, and not on the day that we've just had a change in our leadership.
Okay. Nationals Senator Matt Canavan says that Jacinta Price should now come back to the National Party room. Do you think she should?
Jacinta is free to join either of the party rooms. She's joined the party room of the Liberal Party. We welcome that. We welcome a broad sense of views inside our own party room. We're entirely relaxed about that, but that's a matter for Jacinta, not for me.
Are you ready for the amount of work there is ahead, do you think?
I think we have an incredibly talented team. We've got new members, returning members and senators that have great capacity and capability, great life experience, and I'm confident that we can develop the economic policies and also the policies which present us as a party able to take Australia forward on a fair basis. I'm very confident about that.
Senator Andrew Bragg, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Isobel.
Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price was apparently warmly welcomed to the Liberal Party room this morning after defecting from the Nationals Party room last week. She opted not to run for deputy, as she'd previously announced, after her pick, Angus Taylor, lost the top spot. In a statement, Senator Price said it was not the result that she wanted, but would not lessen her resolve to build and strengthen the Liberal Party. Sussan Ley wouldn't rule out a position for Senator Price in her shadow ministry.
I welcomed Jacinta into the Liberal Party room this morning with a big hug, and I know many of my colleagues did. Jacinta is an amazing Indigenous Australian, but someone who is a clear and talented communicator. So I want to make it very clear, and I know I have many times, how much we welcome Jacinta into this party room. I will have more to say about the shaping of my shadow cabinet going forward, but I will say this. My shadow cabinet will include people who did support me in this room this morning and people who did not.
One person who was closely watching the results of the Liberal leadership ballot today was the Greens' Senator Dorinda Cox, who was the first Indigenous woman to represent Western Australia in the Senate. And she joins us now from Perth. Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
The Liberal Party has elected Sussan Ley as leader, not Jacinta Price. What does that say to you about where the party might be headed on Indigenous affairs?
Well, firstly, congratulations to Ms Ley on her winning the opposition leader this morning. I think what that means is Sussan Ley, as a moderate, is obviously trying to realign the party back into the centre-right. That is very obvious, and that was what we heard in the polls, and that people in Australia really rejected a whole hard right, Trumpian style politics here in Australia, and I think that the Liberal Party finally got that message.
Sussan Ley said that she thinks Australians should unite under one flag, but she was happy to stand in front of Aboriginal flags. She said she's done that before. What do you make of those comments?
Well, I think Sussan Ley needs to pick a side. I think that commentary previously from coalition leaders such as Peter Dutton around only choosing one flag, and the Australian flag is a divisive way of approaching this. And I think that what that signals to broader Australia is there is an opportunity for reconciliation in this country, for First Nations justice and recognising sovereignty. And I think that this is a real opportunity for Sussan Ley as the new opposition leader to absolutely go on as she starts. And today was that day to create that position, and I think she may have lost that.
The former opposition leader, Peter Dutton, talked about welcome to countries being overdone or unnecessary. That then started some public debate around that issue. Do you see the defeat of the Liberal Party as a repudiation of that particular sentiment?
Yeah, I believe that broader Australia have a general grasp of what welcome to country actually is. It's a very generous gesture about welcoming to country, and country meaning not as broader Australia. It's the nation, the First Nations element of where you're actually situated. It's the ground in which your feet are on. And so understanding what a welcome to country is the first part of that. And I think that broader Australia do understand the sentiment in which First Nations leaders and traditional owners who provide that actually do. It's a safe passage, it's a blessing that is provided to people in the way that you travel through the different parts of Australia. And I think that it's been weaponised within a political sense, and it's been used in the culture wars. And I absolutely think that Australians are sick and tired of that type of politics. It feeds into the hard right politics that we see in other parts of the world. And I think that at the ballot box in this federal election, Australians firmly rejected that.
Senator Jacinta Price was outspoken on wanting to change some of the party's policy on Aboriginal issues. She had spoken about welcome to countries as well. What do you make of her views as a fellow Aboriginal woman?
Well, I think Senator Price has her own views, as I do, as a very strong Yamatji Noongar woman, and the diversity of First Nations culture across our country is huge. There are over 200 different clans, nations and tribes that exist. And what we have to do is incorporate and understand and respect that diversity, particularly when we are federal politicians. Again, I would not like to see this weaponised in a political sense or used for political gain. This is an opportunity for us to educate and to bring together respectfully a conversation and a dialogue that's really important for people to understand what is the first chapter of the history of this nation, as well as celebrating the multiculturalism that now exists in contemporary Australia.
If Jacinta Price was, for example, given the shadow Indigenous Affairs portfolio, would you be worried about that?
I absolutely would. I think that there has been a firm rejection, particularly here in Western Australia, from my community around the respect for a cultural protocol. And so I would ask Senator Price to consider what that actually means in holding the portfolio of Indigenous affairs issues for Australia. I think that that comes with a mark of respect. I think that we all have to incorporate and understand what that history and the impact of our experience of colonisation and also what that means in a very, very contemporary way, the way we navigate through those systems and through our communities. And we must do that with the most utmost respect for our communities, and I think for our leaders in particular to lead us through that process, and that requires us to actually listen and respect all of those views.
Well, speaking of leaders, it is in fact the Labor Party in power, so we should talk about them. What would you like to see done about Indigenous recognition? Labor's already said it won't be bringing back the voice. They appear to have dropped their plans for a Makarrata Commission. What do you think Labor should be doing in this space?
Yeah, I think this is a real opportunity, particularly in the Senate, now that the Greens hold what we hope to be the sole balance of power in what should be touted as a progressive Senate and a progressive government. Although Labor will hold the majority of seats in the House of Representatives, we will help Labor to progress any reform that they bring that absolutely represents the changes that are required, and I think it's about time that we actually do that. Our policy is very clear. We want to pursue truth and justice at the federal level in creating a commission, which is similar to the Makarrata Commission. Our party was very clear around its intention to implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full, and we continue to pursue that. We will bring that piece of legislation back onto the floor of the Senate later on this year for voting, and I think it's an opportunity for Labor to absolutely demonstrate courage and leadership at the federal level to make sure that people have the opportunity to correct the record around mis and disinformation of our history, but also to build a pathway for healing and peace in this country. And I think that the way that they can do that is to support our bill.
Just lastly, it is the Greens' turn for a new leader. You'll be voting on that on Thursday. Who would you back?
Well, I am keeping all of those options open. We have some fantastic and amazing leaders in their own right sitting in my party room, and I look forward to the dialogue and the discussion that will happen on Thursday. But I'm keeping all of my options open, and I think that what we will see is an amazing team of 11 senators being returned to the Senate with our highest vote, but also our wonderful member for Ryan, Elizabeth Watson-Brown, who's been returned to her seat in Queensland.
Thank you so much, Senator Dorinda Cox. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, the mood was jubilant at Government House today, but there is still leftover tension from the dumping of some senior cabinet ministers. Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles has been labelled a factional assassin by one of those demoted ministers, Ed Husic. Last week, some Muslim leaders called for Anthony Albanese to save Husic, a call the PM did not answer. Treasurer Jim Chalmers tried to shake off questions about factional divisions this morning.
I wouldn't use those words to describe him, but again, it's not for me to kind of engage in a running commentary on Ed's comments. I understand why Ed's unhappy. I'd be unhappy too if I was Ed and if I was Mark. And it was a messy week last week. But I want to assure people that the overwhelming focus of the government is on the economic challenges before us at a time of extreme global economic uncertainty and opportunity for Australia. This is what happens when you've got more good people than you have spots in the ministry and in the cabinet. People will miss out from time to time.
To discuss the Albanese government's new look frontbench and the election fallout, former Labor advisor Ryan Liddell is with us. Thank you so much for your time.
No worries, Isobel. Good afternoon.
The scale of the win, I think, took a lot of people by surprise. Did it take you by surprise?
Well, yes. I think there are only two people in the country, well, maybe this is an exaggeration, but it seems to me there are only two people, particularly in the Labor Party, who thought we might win majority by a significant margin, and they were Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Trade Minister Senator Don Farrell. The scale was significant, and usually with elections, like you know this, Isobel, like in 2022 we talked about the West coming back for the Labor Party. The really interesting thing this election was that every state around the country did some heavy lifting. Obviously, there was a big swing in Queensland. There was a 9% swing in Tasmania. South Australia, my home state of South Australia. Claire Clutterham won the seat of Sturt off James Stephens, and across in the West as well. And even Victoria held up despite all the dire predictions of the Liberal Party and the commentators. So the scale was extraordinary, and I think it's fair to say it took most people in the country by surprise.
There seems to be sort of competing views on whether it was an election that the Coalition lost or that Labor won. How do you see it?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the Coalition ran the worst campaign in the history of Australian politics. I think that's you can see all the backbiting, the sniping and the circular sort of firing squad that we're seeing amongst various parts of the Coalition campaign apparatus over the last 2 weeks, which is testament to that. But I think the campaign that Anthony Albanese, Paul Erickson and the Labor Party ran was absolutely supreme for a couple of reasons. One, they stuck on the issues that they knew would convince swinging voters to vote for the Labor Party. And secondly, their messaging was relentless. You only get a finite amount of time to engage with with a big portion of the electorate during an election campaign. And if you waste that time by talking about things like, what flags you're going to stand in front of, or, whether it's appropriate to have a welcome to country, before a council meeting, like these are sorts of things that, aren't sort of changing votes. And particularly when, issues like cost of living and housing are so pertinent around the family, around the kitchen tables of so many families in the country.
There's been a bit of factional argy-bargy since then. What do you think about what happened to Ed Husic and Mark Dreyfus?
I feel for Mark and I feel for Ed. I know them both personally, and they're both very good people. And the way that it happened obviously wasn't ideal. But I'm a strong supporter of the factional system. That may be a controversial thing to say to many of the people watching this program today, but it works for Labor Party for a number of reasons. One, it provides stability across within the party when you organise along belief systems around the left and the right of the party rather than around personalities. That provides a certain amount of stability. And secondly, it provides appropriate representation. And I guess when I say that, when I talk about appropriate representation, I mean it means you have new talent coming through, or encourages to come through. It means that in times past, such as the 80s, where the New South Wales branch of the ALP was extremely strong, without the factions and representation of other states, you may have had a huge number of people, from New South Wales. Every member of Parliament in New South Wales would have had a cabinet spot, whereas people in WA, South Australia and Tasmania would have been left wanting. So overwhelmingly, it is a positive thing. But I do feel for Ed and I do feel for Mark. It was a disappointing week.
I think you're right that people probably don't really understand the faction system. They just want to know that the best person for the job got it. So why shouldn't the best person for the job get it rather than, looking at factions?
Well, I think if you look at the front bench that was sworn in by the Prime Minister today, I mean, the cabinet announced yesterday is an absolute ripper of a cabinet. There are people moved into different positions, promotions, people moved across. I think on paper, that's one of the best, if not the best, cabinets I've seen in my time around politics. So I think that's testament to the calibre of the people that have been put in Parliament by the electorate on the Labor side. And also the number as well. When you've got 93, 94 people in the House of Reps, plus close to 30 people in the Senate, that's a lot more people to choose from than perhaps the Liberal Party or the National Party on the other side of the aisle.
Do you think anyone's looking for retribution after that? Ed Husic, if he wanted, could be a pretty outspoken critic on the backbench.
Look, I've seen those reports. I think. Look, at the end of the day, Ed's understandably upset. If I was treated the way that Ed was treated, I can absolutely sympathise with that. But I think overwhelmingly, the Labor Party understands why it's been put where it is. I think the result of a couple of Saturdays ago was extraordinary and unprecedented in so many ways. That's sort of the margin they won by in terms of two-party preferred, but as well as the number of seats won is off the charts. And I don't think people will take that for granted. I think they'll work towards implementing the policies that are elected to do.
Much has been made of the Prime Minister's relationship with Tanya Plibersek. She's been moved out of environment into social services. Is that a demotion, do you think?
I read the papers today and all of them sort of talked about it as a demotion. I reckon it's absolute rubbish. There's a world in which if it had been the other way around, I'm sure they would have said environment was a demotion from social services. I mean, the idea that you can be the minister responsible for policy that has a direct impact on, more than half of Australians' lives, if not more, is a demotion is just absolutely ludicrous. So, I know for a fact that she's looking forward to the job, relishing that job, and I think she's perfectly suited for the role.
Well, there's lots of portfolios to talk about. We can't go through all of them, but on the issue of gambling reform in particular, Labor really grappled with that in this term. Annika Wells has been given communications and the sport portfolio, sport which gets its money from gambling. That's surely a very difficult task for her.
Well, I think Annika's a huge talent. She's come up through the Queensland right of the ALP and has shown time and time again that she's up to the task and can smash out of the park. She did a great job as Minister for Ageing, and I think she'll do an excellent job as Minister for Communications and Minister for Sport.
Do you think they'll actually get reform on this issue, though? Will Labor actually change anything in gambling?
I think it's important to remember the policy that the Labor Party took to the election was that they were still considering, the recommendations of the Murphy inquiry. I think there are a whole range of stakeholders here. I think, the worst thing that could happen is that there would be unforeseen impacts across funding when it comes to sport, when it comes to community programs, etc. So Like, I think there will. I think there will still be consideration of some sort of reform, but bear in mind there wasn't an actual significant policy on gambling that was taken to the election, and the Prime Minister's priorities have been to implement those commitments. So, and that's as it should be, and as testament to the huge majority that that he won a few Saturdays ago.
Just one final question. Where do the dangers lie for Labor now? With such a huge majority, there's been this talk of not getting too confident.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a problem?
I think it could be a problem, but I think you've got to remain hungry if you win government. I think, well, I'm from South Australia, and I spent a lot of time with members of the government, Peter Malinowskis, etc. They've maintained that hunger to deliver, and even though the opposition down there is an absolute rabble, the opposition is not doing a very good job sort of holding them to account. But the government holds themselves to a very high standard. And I think that's a model that I'd expect the Prime Minister and his cabinet to sort of aspire to. There's that hunger to deliver, because I know that the people around the cabinet table in Canberra know that if they sit still, if they don't get on with delivering, then people will mark them down rightly for that.
Ryan Liddell, appreciate your insights and time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Isobel.
Well, the trade war between the US and China isn't over. A deal has been reached between the two to pause reciprocal tariffs for 90 days. To unpack this, economics professor Warwick McKibbin from the Australian National University joins us. Warwick McKibbin, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Can you just take us through what has actually happened here?
Well, it depends on the time of day and the day of the week, but essentially there's been a negotiated settlement to pause the trade war, which means tariffs are falling from 145% US tariffs on China down to 30%, and that Chinese tariffs on the US will drop to 10%. It's a 90-day pause, and there's a range of other 90-day pauses already in the system from the previous April 2nd announcements. So it's enormous uncertainty, but it's also showing that the stress on the US economy was too much for the president to bear, and he's buckled under pressure. Yeah,
I mean, is this a major capitulation from him?
Well, it was clear the problems that it was creating. We did an analysis for the Peterson Institute in Washington September last year before the election, and there were three main problems. One were the tariffs that he was proposing, which were going to disrupt the US economy. The second was the deportations of 5% of the US working age population, and the third was taking over the Fed and delinking the US as the risk-free asset for the world economy. Those last two are actually more important and bigger impacts than the tariff war, but the tariff war was enacted very early on, so we're seeing the beginning of a series of disruptive policies.
What actually changed for Donald Trump? Because I imagine all of this advice was given to him beforehand. Why has he changed his mind now?
Well, there's a difference between beliefs and trust. If you talk to MAGA supporters, they trust the president. His policies weren't based on any substantive evidence. In fact, most economists argued that his key policies were going to be very counterproductive. He tested them, which is the good news is he did it early. He tested them. He showed the world that tariffs cause enormous disruption. They destroy small businesses within the US economy. They cause inflation and output to move around. They cause people to lose their jobs, and they cause the bond market to crash and the stock markets to crash. So we very quickly got the results that we'd predicted coming in, and that had to cause the president and some of his advisors to change their opinion at least, or to at least understand that their view of the world was actually not how the world works.
Australia was, of course, going to be subject to some sort of tariff, as you say, depended on the time of day as to what exactly that was. But what does this change mean for Australia?
Well, we did a lot of work, and being an Australian sitting in Washington doing the analysis, Australia's results are always at the forefront of my thinking, and certainly we were passing through the information to the Australian government. The direct impact on Australia is quite small of a tariff that America proposed. We largely export beef for hamburgers and mining to the US. We can easily sell those products into other countries in the world, so the direct impact on us was small. There were actually some positive effects because the tariffs on us were smaller than other countries, which meant people would substitute buying agricultural products from Canada to buy them from Australia in the US. And so we actually had this more positive. The net effect of the tariffs alone was possibly positive on Australia, but the effect of the tariffs on China was enormously negative, and that impact overwhelmed the other effects on the Australian economy. So it was the second round effects via China that were really going to cause the Australian economy a little bit of discomfort, but nothing like a recession or a significant economic blow.
Well, the Treasury modelling at the time, I think, was warning that Trump's tariffs would have some effect on our GDP. So will that still happen?
Well, that was my modelling as well. They happened to use my model. But yeah, that will still happen. I think the bigger issue is not so much the tariffs themselves and how much they change the price of different products. It's the uncertainty that it creates in the marketplace. People will be unsure about what investment to undertake. They'll be unsure where to source their products. You know, a 90-day pause when you're in the middle of a production network isn't really helpful because you're making decisions that have much longer time horizons. For some decisions, you're making decisions that have a 3, 4, 5, 10-year time horizon. So I think the economic slowdown at the global level is likely to be a bigger problem for Australia than the direct impacts of the tariffs by themselves.
The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, predicted that we would get some interest rate cuts on the back of that global downturn. So if that isn't going to be quite as significant, are rate cuts still on the cards, do you think?
Well, in our modelling, again, we model the reaction of the central banks around the world, and under the scenario from April 2nd, which was quite severe, there was a reaction by the central bank in Australia of several rate cuts in the modelling. But if you look at where Australia is right now, we've got inflation sitting just inside the Reserve Bank's band at 2.9%. That's the measure the Reserve Bank uses. We've got incredibly low unemployment by historical standards at 4.1%. And I think the interest rate at the moment at 4.1% is a neutral interest rate. So I think policy in Australia is neutral. The shock from the US and from other parts of the world will put downward pressure on that. But the fiscal spending that the government has promised during the election campaign is going to put upward pressure on interest rates. So I think when you put all the pieces together, it's hard to see any reason for the Reserve Bank to be cutting interest rates under current information in the next few months.
That is a bit of a turnaround. On the issue of, I guess, the US and China relations then, is that therefore better for them and better for the global economy?
Well, it is, and I think the US really doesn't understand that it's actually a small part of the world economy. In terms of trade, it's 14% of global trade. In terms of GDP, or measured at current US dollar exchange rates, it's around 25%. It's much smaller when you measure it at world prices. So the US is about a quarter of the world. So the problem is they think they're actually running the world, and they're not. There's already a massive shift in the last 20 or 30 years of global production and consumption towards Asia. And fortunately for Australia, we're sitting in the fastest growing part of the world economy. Even though China is slowing, we've got India, we've got Indonesia, we've got Southeast Asia. So when you look at the actual economics at the global level, it's very unusual for the US, who's got a declining share of the world economy, to try and take on the rest of the world, when in fact all it does is accelerate a process which was already underway.
We don't have long left, about a minute, but how do you predict Donald Trump? Well, this is a difficult question, I realise. Do you predict Donald Trump will do anything more to change these current settings?
Oh, I think there's a lot more coming down the road. It's a random process, this decision making, and I think he will put his comments up on Truth Social, and then his cabinet and other advisors are going to have to clean it up. We've got another 3.5 years of this, although I think by the time we get to the midterms in 18 months that there's going to be a totally different political situation in the US. The people that get hurt by these policies are the people that voted for him, and that's the irony of the entire Trump experiment.
Thank you so much for your time, Warwick McKibbin. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Isobel. Great to be here.
That's afternoon briefing for today. Stay with us here on ABC News. Joe O'Brien is up next with today's top stories. We'll see you soon.